Hi there, this is the Why We Horror podcast. This is episode 1, and in it we're going to be talking about the movie Cabin in the Woods and sort of dig into why we horror. Uh, I just want to give a brief trigger warning here. We are going to be talking about a movie that has quite a bit of bodily dismemberment, some um, objectification, and Joss Whedon. So, if any of these are triggers for you, just wanted to put that up front. Hi, I'm Matt, and my favorite scary movie of all time is Scream. Let's move on to my next host.
My name's also Matt, but my last name's Sasma, and that's what more people know me by. And my favorite horror movie is Get Out.
Who's next?
I guess I'll go next. My name is Mike, and my favorite horror movie is The Empty Man.
Nice.
All right, to me, I'm Amber. I don't actually like scary movies, but here I am. And with that said, my favorite scary movie that I consider mostly a thriller or suspense would be the original Saw.
Fascinating. Right on. So, like I said, we are going to be your hosts for this episode, talking about Cabin in the Woods. Cabin in the Woods was directed by Drew Goddard, written by Joss Whedon and Drew Goddard, starring Kristen Connolly, Chris Hemsworth, Anna Hutchison, Fran Kranz, and Jesse Williams. It was photographed by the great Peter Deming, who did the Scream movies as well as Evil Dead 2. The score is by David Julyan and edited by Lisa Lassek, who's worked with Joss Whedon on pretty much everything he has ever done. Brief synopsis of this movie is it's about 5 college students who go to a cabin in the woods and accidentally unleash unspeakable evils. But there's quite a bit more that lurks beneath that cabin. So I wanted to sort of break this movie into a lot of little interesting talking points, because this is a film that is far more than just that standard horror thrill ride that the film kind of promises, that sounds so incredibly basic and so tired and rote. And that's kind of the whole point, right? The movie starts with a series of images that you see blood streaming down the screen, covering depictions of sacrificial offerings, which I think is something that this movie dives deep on, is that this is kind of the modern equivalent of the sacrifice of the innocent. We tell these stories, these modern horror films and whatnot, as a way to placate the gods by sacrificing youth, and they kind of give that right up front, and it's part of human tradition in the modern sense. Did anybody have anything they wanted to discuss with that aspect of the film?
I thought it was kind of interesting that, like, they talk about how it evolved, over time, the different rituals. And I like that they showed different cultures having their specific rituals, but they were all essentially for the same entity. So I thought the ritualist aspect was pretty fun.
Yeah, same. And it was interesting to me because as I was watching it, I'm always like, wait, why are they just believing that this is a real ritual and it will actually appease the gods? Now, in the movie, it actually ultimately is the case, but to me, I'd be like, why are people actually participating in this? The people running the ritual sacrifice. But we know in human history, it actually did happen in ancient times. And so I did like that kind of, like, my initial gut was like, nobody would actually follow through on any of this, but human nature in certain societies, it did give rise to these things. And my personal view is that a lot of it comes down to getting a sense of control.
Yeah. Amber, did you have any thoughts on that?
Not like the rituals itself, but I just like the whole, we've evolved, right? We've come into the 20th century, and the idea of having like put these rituals into an office setting where someone is like setting it up and it's their day job to like their 9 to 5 is to clock in and set up these rituals around the world, seeing like who will go through with it and ultimately like save humanity, or like you failed and your day job is gone now because the world is gone. So
yeah, it's kind of interesting that the idea of sacrificing or making sacrifice to appease the gods. In this case, the gods, I think, obviously are kind of a stand-in for film audiences. We're going to accept the story that's told in front of us, or if we don't, we're going to be up in arms, quite literally, as seen at the end of the film. And it's neat that this film kind of dives into why we tell these kind of stories in the first place, which is quite honestly why I chose this to be the pilot episode of this podcast. But that all kind of fits into the whole idea that this film is kind of an allegory for making movies, right? The film tells you, it gives you the movie that you're watching, while also showing you a peek behind the curtain of how these things get made and how tired tropes get carried on. And I thought that was kind of neat, right down to the repeated lines that make no sense. The like, we have to split up, we'll cover more ground that way. I watched this movie like a week ago, and since then I can't remember what it was. I think it was an episode of Scooby-Doo. They used the exact same line, and I was like, wow.
Did they say how long or how often they had to do this ritual?
I think they mention every year, so it's an annual event.
So like a studio making a movie a year.
Oh, that isn't, yeah. I
Yeah.
actually didn't think of it like that, like a studio making a movie to kind of be the ritual. I actually had some thoughts like related to like the military and like the sacrifice of like people in that office deciding what is for the greater good and deciding other people need to make that sacrifice and like taking their lives into their hands.
Yeah. That's interesting.
yeah, I like the comparison of like a film studio doing these rituals, right? Those are their films. And the fact that we did see like all of these other cultures, right? And each one of them fail in turn. It's almost like the studio is like banking on different movies that they put out, and like that one was a flop. All right, what about this one? Is that one going well? No, that one flopped too. Here's the next one. And like that's their last one, and like it needs to make the money. It needs to be the one that's successful. Otherwise all hell breaks loose, literally.
I like how they kind of riff on J horror with the stand-in for The Ring or The Grudge or whatever that was, and how after a certain amount of time that story, those visuals get so diluted, they're not scary anymore, they're silly, right down to like a friendship circle happening around them that like disbands the evil, which is such a kind of silly little notion.
I also thought it was pretty interesting that, and I don't know if that was what they were intending, but like they had to sacrifice these people to appease the gods, but they just had vials of whatever ready to go. Once the person was sacrificed, they just broke it open. So it's just almost like that's like a check mark for like the boxes they had to hit. We have to do each one of these, and then, well, the last person either has to die or they don't. It doesn't really matter if we want a sequel or not. It's what it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, the ritual didn't even really matter what happened. They'll use what they have, but it's all just for show.
Yeah. I thought that was kind of neat. Breaking into like the characters that we're following within the movie itself, the people that we're introduced to in an early scene, the Chris Hemsworth and Kristen Connolly and stuff like that, they're established as being completely different than their actual characters that they are once the movie starts to play. And it's not unlike actors versus the characters that they're playing. Oftentimes the characters are dumbed down, simple archetypal characters. They're not people. They're just fodder. And they think of them in like Breakfast Clubbian kind of notions. And I thought that was also a neat way to see behind the curtain before you even get into the control room stuff, where you're spending time with the two guys who kind of are the stand-ins for both Joss Whedon and Drew Goddard, who are writing and molding the story at hand, right down to the director and the chem department, like special effects and all that kind of stuff.
And then they use it like foreshadowing too for that. Like, it's still obviously supposed to be a movie where you're supposed to take the characters as they are, but they at least like they show that Chris Hemsworth is like smart because he's talking about those like books from college. They talk about the chem department failure in the past. So it's like they still want it to be a standalone horror movie if you're not reading into all this, but it's like for people that do overanalyze, it's like perfect.
It's actually interesting that you talk about Chris Hemsworth, because so in this movie, the 5 archetypes were what? The whore, the jock, which was Chris Hemsworth, then there was the scholar, which I'm forgetting, Holden, or no, that was the...
No, Holden was his name.
Yeah, okay. And then there's
I think so.
The fool, and then the virgin. But like, so it's interesting that they portrayed Chris Hemsworth as more intelligent in the beginning, but then the role of the archetype in kind of the final scenes, he was portrayed as the jock.
Yeah, and when you first meet Jesse, he's the one that catches Jesse Williams. I think Holden was his name or whatever. He catches the ball, so you can see he is the athletic jock type. It's a role reverse.
So
yeah.
They talked about those 5 archetypes, but there's probably more. Are there other horror movies that have generic archetypes that aren't included in Cabin in the Woods?
God, I'm sure there are. Let me kind of rack my brain. That's a really good question.
Yeah.
Nothing is popping out at me, but that can't be real life. There's not a single like character of color or another like type of person represented in the film, so I guess that would be something that you'd see, especially in like some of the Friday the 13th films. You'd have like a token black character that was often reflective of some like pop star at the time. I'm thinking the Michael Jackson stand-in from Friday the 13th 5, but you get those oftentimes in these movies.
Well, and then the casting sense, that's the dynamic. It's just that typically you think that like the black character would be the first one to die because of like stereotypical film roles, but that didn't happen in this one.
Yeah, it's true. Also, sort of discussing the structure of the movie, I thought there was something that they did that was really clever. The movie kind of follows a very by the numbers formula by design for the fodder characters, the core 5 archetypes. You have the meeting, you have the them getting the warning from the Harbinger, which is one of the funniest scenes in the movie. You follow that up with them at the house. They engage and unleash the evil, right? Then they have to fight the evil. And the villains that we get are like so disappointing, and I feel like that was absolutely on purpose and a reflection of kind of the era this movie was written in. At the time, you got lots of zombie movies. That was when 28 Days Later, your Dawn of the Dead, the Resident Evil movies, these were coming out in like every couple of months. Or you were getting your remakes of what was it, The Hills Have Eyes and Wrong Turn and things like that, where you got like the hill folk, and they sort of just merged them together. But the whole thing I found interesting is the same warnings that are issued throughout the film for the like fodder characters are also issued back to the people behind the curtains. Mordecai calls them and warns them about these kids being different than the normal ones. You get the repeated line of "Let's get this party started," and then the dancing kind of breaks out, which Chris Hemsworth did, or they did at the party for the celebration before all hell broke loose on their end. And I thought that it was neat that they're putting the filmmakers on trial essentially for what they've been doing and been complacent doing this whole time.
Yeah, because only one person of opposition in the control room was the new guard, and because he was new to the whole thing, and he just like, what are we looking at? What are we doing? And at one point, the two guys were just like, we have to do this. Like, it doesn't matter if we like it or not. We have to do it because they need entertainment. Like, they need the show. And the girl and Captain or Thor were out in the woods. I can't remember their names.
She was a yellow Power Ranger, fun fact. So when the yellow Power Ranger and Thor were in the woods.
Yeah. That's all I remember. Don't remember the rest of the movie.
Fair enough. I thought it was also kind of neat that the director of the film, or of the event or whatever, ended up also being played by a famous final girl in the horror genre by having Sigourney Weaver play the director. That was super neat. And you have the confrontation of kind of the old guard and it's time for something to change.
Right. Yeah. It was a nice little teaser to see her come out and be like, I'm the head honcho. It was, of course, you're going to have like a horror icon be the final boss, essentially.
Yeah. The last piece of sort of like an analytical theme that I wanted to discuss on my end before opening the floor up to you cats is the idea of surveillance and voyeurism. This is a movie that actually puts us into the movie. Like, we're the ones that will be outraged by the end of it if they don't give us what we want. And throughout the whole film, we're seeing people watching people, the whole surveillance, the voyeurism of it all. I think one of the best scenes in the film is really early on when they find the one-way mirror, and how eventually that breaks. In order for them to break from the tradition of what these films are, they have to break that glass to get the girl out. And but throughout that scene, even those characters are being watched by the writers, who are being watched by us. But why is it that we are so obsessed with kind of watching others?
If we aren't watching other people, what are we watching? Like, if we're watching a movie, you know what I mean? Like,
I know. I mean,
but it is.
No,
it
I
is
feel
about the voyeurism, or like it's not just watching what other people are doing in like a public setting where people know you're being watched, right? It's the hidden surveillance.
Yeah.
And there is some part of human nature that likes getting, I think, a peek behind the curtains into people's, because like I think so often people, I don't know if I want to call it everyone putting on a mask, but we behave differently in public or when you're being recorded than when I'm alone talking to my cat, right? And people would probably find that pretty entertaining if I was just acting, talking a different voice and stuff like that. So I understand the appeal. I don't know how to answer the question of why does that appeal to so many people, but it is an interesting question.
It kind of speaks to the whole idea of
it's
why
like
we
seeing something
horror.
you're not supposed to see. So
Yeah, we're watching something we know we shouldn't. It's not okay to watch somebody die, but somehow this is
And it's-
fun for a whole audience of people. And it's not for everybody, but for those that it kind of speaks to, they can't get enough of it.
And I think that is a real part of human nature too. If you read some like old books or like testaments of like public executions, they were huge events. People would bring their kids to like watch somebody get hanged. Now it obviously wasn't for some people, and some people would, you know, throw up or faint, but like other people, they're cheering it on. And so I think the movie does capture some aspect of human nature.
Yeah. I do think that one of the more interesting talking points of the whole voyeurism angle is the objectification of the yellow Power Ranger in the woods. How they're sitting there manipulating the scene as writers, getting it to this really uncomfortable place that like she doesn't want to be in, and we're seeing that, but they're manipulating behind the scenes because, to quote the characters, they need to satisfy the audience. And that's like really kind of unsettling, and the film kind of forces you to acknowledge that, especially when it's such a big part of the horror genre, and one of the more problematic elements of it, and how they also conflate like the sex and the violence, the I guess two forms of penetration. It kind of is one of the most like abrasive scenes easily in the film. And it's like ugly, but it's a really necessary component of the format of these films. Did anybody have anything else they saw in the film that they wanted to kind of discuss before moving on to fun facts?
So I guess still related to that one-way mirror, I thought one scene that was super interesting is when we were first introduced to it very early on, and the one girl is changing, and then Holden is on the other side, and he's like having the moral dilemma of, do I stop her and say something, or do I just, you know, do I enjoy the show? And like you could see him kind of struggle, kind of make a joke about it, but it's also weird because as part of the audience, the movie itself was kind of displaying like a sexy scene, right? And then all of a sudden you see the voyeurism aspect and him struggling with that decision. And so it really highlighted how in a lot of horror movies they have like a sex scene or something like that, and you're kind of being voyeuristic about it, but you might not realize it because it's part of a movie and you're detached from reality. But then once you see him on the other side of the mirror making that judgment, then it's like, oh, okay, like that. If it was actually in the real world, that's very different than a sexy scene in a horror movie, in most other horror movies.
Yeah, the camera turns on us several times.
I think that so. Well, having us see him, see her, like that's what really is the real test, basically. Because like, if you see him, see her, and you can see what he's seeing, you would choose not to watch it, hopefully, and let her know. And so, like, the real dilemma is watching him make that choice when he doesn't know that anybody sees him. So, like, that's the aspect that I think is more, for the voyeurism at least, is like multiple layers, I suppose.
I thought it was a really good introduction to the character and got me like, because I think I didn't know the character well before that scene, and like my emotions of like, oh, I don't like him, oh, I like him, oh, I don't like him, I think was really well done. And so I thought it was a great way to give a lot of insight to a character in a very short amount of time, where I didn't have a judgment before going into it. And throughout the entire scene, I wasn't sure how I would feel about the character.
Right. For me, he would have made a different choice. I would not have liked him. So,
right?
It's definitely, you're right, a good way to introduce him.
We lost Mike's audio.
Oh no.
I could hear
We're
him.
good now. Okay, that might just be on my end.
I think his choice to not watch, and hopefully like the audience, being like, yes, that was the right choice. I think it sort of portrays like where we were culturally and like are still sort of moving in that direction, but like we're not happy seeing like women being objectified in films as much as like it was acceptable in the 80s, the 70s horror films where it was like
Yeah.
all the women were naked and usually covered in blood and like really violated in all of these ways, and we were like, that's fine, but like we just don't want to watch it anymore. It's not just because it's like old and gross. We're just like hopefully becoming better people, and so I think they were using these characters to say like it doesn't have to be that way. We can make a horror film where these things don't happen. And even though we do still get like that very short scene with the Yellow Ranger in the woods, I think it's done in a way that's sort of saying like enough is enough. Like, look how ridiculous this is. Look how staged it is. Look how like controlled it is. It wouldn't happen in reality. Like, we are better than this and we can do better. So I think they're sort of using these characters as us as well, so we can see that like we're not going to fall for the same stuff that horror has given us, like that we can also do better.
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree with you on that. And I like that the direction we are going is like, well, you know me, Matt. I'm always like, they didn't need that in the movie. Like, same thing. We don't need it. Could have been shorter.
No, I feel that. The thing that I also like about that mirror scene is it gets reversed too, where when they switch rooms, she has the moment of like, oh crap, do I watch? And then she's kind of watching for a second and is like, no, this isn't right, and then hangs up the creepy painting. The Yellow Ranger, we keep saying we should name her character. It's Jules. I had to consult my notes. Jules. The only character we haven't talked about, interestingly enough, is Marty, who I think in a lot of ways kind of steals the show. And I like how it's a kind of reversal of the tradition to not only have the fool survive, and there's another film that this is pretty similar to where the fool character also kind of survives, and that would be sort of like Randy in Scream. Whereas this guy is far more of a fool. They're just the two kind of geek tropes. The other one is the main lead. Dana is clearly painted as having been sexually active in a romance with somebody much older that got like a romance that got severed. But so you have the actual kind of promiscuous girl person survive with the actual kind of stoner dude. These two are usually the first two that are killed.
Well, I found it was interesting because I didn't watch this movie since it came out in the theater, so it was quite a while. For whatever reason, I kept thinking that, they made a mistake. They flipped they didn't know that she was a virgin and that Marty was, and so that they messed up like the sacrifice order. So I was like, oh man, they really could mess this up. It turned out that wasn't the case, but it would have been interesting if it was.
That would have been, yeah.
Marty's my favorite.
What's her name?
Marty's your favorite?
Marty is my favorite, and I think it's because like he is both the fool and also the only one who knows what's actually happening, but he like says it in this foolish way. Like, we get like the crazy scientist from every like apocalypse movie, right, where he's like, the science, and he's ranting and raving, and his hair is really big, and he has glasses, and so no one's paying attention, and he has a stained pocket square, whatever, so everyone's like, no, don't listen to him. But Marty the whole time is like not falling for any of the stuff that's going on. Like, we continually see that in the back end, they have to get chemicals out. They have to change some of their own rules to like make these characters behave in the way that they quote unquote should be behaving, and they're just not, right? And Marty's like calling it out every time. He's the guy that's like, don't read from the book, never read the Latin. And of course they do, and what happens, right? And then he's like, they're following us, they're gonna make us do this, we should never split up. And like he knows what's happening, and he knows that they're watching the whole time, and he's the quote unquote fool. So he's the smartest one. He's clearly, his drugs somehow make him immune to whatever's happening, which is one of the silliest things that happens in the film, I think. But he's just like, he knew what was up the whole time, and everyone pushes him aside and says, don't listen to that guy, he's the quote unquote fool, right? But he's my favorite because he's so silly about the way that he figures everything out that like even us as the audience, knowing full well he's right, are like, no, he's silly.
Two interesting things about him, not necessarily interesting things, but one, he has a delivery that just kills me every single time, and it's when Chris Hemsworth's like, maybe the wind blew it open when the trapdoor flies up, and then he just goes, the wind? The way he says that just kills me every time. But they were talking about him on the commentary of the film. Fran Kranz was far more fit than any of the other actors in the movie when they were filming. They had to like put him in really baggy clothes and stuff like that because he was more in shape than Chris Hemsworth.
That's
Very funny.
Yeah. I'm sure that's not the case anymore. But.
Well, I liked him too, but I also like, it's fun to see like any other time he is crazy. like anything he's saying when he's smoking is like crazy. But it just happened to be the one time that he's like rambling about nonsense conspiracy. It's the most real thing in the world. And that's one of the foreshadows, is that the last time they failed was because the chem department messed up. And they're like so far into the you know, their lives, or they're putting stuff in the hair dye that what's her name, Jules bought, like, so they clearly goofed up on what he was smoking to make him not get the way that he was supposed to be, like, controlled everybody else. So that's one thing that they're like, well, it's also the chem department that kind of messed us up this time too, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the problem was they cast an actual stoner in the stoner role because they had that line early on where he's like, this is the secret stash. So they got his stash and his secret stash, but not his other stash, which made him like inoculated to what's going on. And I didn't hear that little tidbit. So that's a good little... Yeah, and that's what he's rolling in the beginning of the movie in the van.
See, it all comes down to one little mistake. The whole world ends.
Right on. Unless anybody else had anything to say, I want to move into some quick fun facts about the movie before we dive into our like true feelings about the film. We cool? All right. This movie had a budget of $30 million and pulled in 66.5 worldwide. It was considered a modest success, but not like anything to really write home about. It was originally set for release in October of 2009, but the film was shelved because of the MGM bankruptcy before getting picked up by Lionsgate for a release in April of 2012, 1 month before the Avengers came out. This film was written over the course of 3 days in a shared hotel where they just split up scenes and each wrote and they'd meet back up, mush it together, and they did that over the course of 3 days, which is shocking how well structured this film is to like bang that out that fast. Heather Langenkamp and her husband David Anderson served as makeup artists and creature designers for the film using Anderson's AFX studio. Heather Langenkamp went under the pseudonym Heather L. Anderson. Heather Langenkamp is famous for being the final girl of the Nightmare on Elm Street saga. She's the main character of Nightmares 1, 3, and 7, and she's married to David Anderson in real life and contributed heavily to the film. And she was very, very excited about the the mer dorsal blood. People considered for the role of the director were Bruce Campbell, Jamie Lee Curtis, and Sigourney Weaver. Bruce Campbell came close but turned it down. Sigourney Weaver accepted with enthusiasm because she very badly wanted to work with a werewolf. And
Okay.
she like got excited asking if it was like a werewolf day, and she like would sit with the guy apparently during lunch. And yeah, so that's fun. My last fun fact, and I found this fascinating because there's reference to the 1998 incident. We even talked about it here. This is almost definitely a reference to the film The Faculty, a film that utilizes similar character archetypes as this film does against horror monsters, but they are able to overcome by snorting a drug which enables them to see who the real monsters are, and there's no actual sacrifices made in the film.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, some quotes about the movie. This is a quote from Joss Whedon on why it was written. He said, "It was a way to pay homage to movies that I adore, in particular The Evil Dead, the ultimate experience in movie horror, but at the same time ask the question not only why do we like to see this, but why do we like to see this exactly? Why do we keep coming back to this formula? You look at something as ugly and stupid and morally bankrupt as the remake to Texas Chainsaw, and you go, not only do we keep performing this ritual, but it's clearly degenerating." So that's kind of why he set out to do this. Drew Goddard had a interesting quote, which was, "As a society, we want to know the answer to everything immediately online, but particularly when it comes to art, some things should not have answers, and at least we shouldn't treat the artist like they are the final say on it. And I don't feel like I'm the final say, even though I wrote and directed the movie," which I think is kind of an important distinction to make. And then I have one last quote from Richard Jenkins, who is one of the writers in the control room. "I love it when people look at something and try to reconceptualize it without changing what that thing is. I think Joss is trying to understand this genre, trying to explain it. Where do these things come from? We see them on screen, but where did they come from?" And ultimately, Joss wanted to end the afterword of the script book, which I got all this information from. You should read this. Maybe we can put an Amazon link or something like that in the down below section. But he said he wrote this because why does anybody tell these stories? Yeah, I found those all very interesting. Lastly, what did we think about this movie now that we've kind of analyzed the hell out of it?
I really liked it. I'd seen it quite a while, like close to when it first came out, and then I had forgotten most of the details, but I remembered that I generally liked it. And then when I rewatched it, I was pretty gripped again. I'm also not like I'm like medium on how much I enjoy horror movies, where I like the suspense, I like the drama. There's a lot of like gore and stuff, which I can kind of shut my brain off and not let it bother me too much. But I thought it all came together really well, and they interjected humor at the correct moments, I think, to alleviate tension and to not just make me feel like gross during the movie, but to enjoy myself while watching it. And the ending, I oftentimes liked having resolution on endings. This was not a very satisfying ending, but it keeps making me think about it, and so I really do actually like it. So in the moment, I'm just like, that's not how I wanted it to end. But in the long term, I think it's a much more impactful ending and makes me continue to think about it.
Well, I just have a quick question about the ending. So I remember, and is there a different ending, or am I just crazy? Because I remember the whole creature coming out and stepping on them, and then the hand thing. And I'm like, wait, I thought they got stepped on. So maybe that's a different movie.
Yeah, I don't think that. I've only seen this one or this end.
So okay. I think for me, if they would have just ended like cut out when the ceiling started crumbling down, I did not like the hand. I don't care. I just didn't care for it. Kind of because it looked bad. The CGI wasn't great in this movie, honestly. For some of the stuff like that bird at the beginning.
Oh.
The two things that were CGI in this movie: the hand and that bird. Everything else, real practical.
The merman, real.
Yeah, that was real.
Like
I do have a couple questions.
Yeah.
So just structurally, like plot-wise questions. So what counts for the ritual and what does not count for the ritual for the kills? Does it have to be those people specifically? Because at the beginning, they're like, sorry, my dog's barking. At the beginning, they were like, okay, we need to do this the certain way. They have to do it on their free will, otherwise it doesn't count. And it's like, well, now at this point, you're actively killing them. Like you're destroying them by hitting into a wall you put there. You're going out there and you're going to shoot them. Like, how is that not being against the ritual? And then 1,000 people get killed by the monsters, and that doesn't count for the ritual. So what is the rules?
I guess I don't think that there's an answer to that. I think it's just for audience satisfaction, which I know is not a satisfying answer to hear.
I don't like it.
It is
hey,
interesting.
Man, you told me I could analyze this, and that was my biggest problem.
No, you're
what
good.
counts
You're
for the sacrifice?
I think that's a good question, though, because at one point, doesn't Sigourney say, like, gosh, I forget, but she said something about how, like, they have to want to do it on their own. Like, they have the choices that they make. If they don't transgress, then they can't be punished. And the point is the punishment, and the point is the pain or the suffering that they feel from doing these things. But every step along the way, like whatever's happened in like the before times to where they are now in like the modernization of these rituals, like they are crafting the situations. They're not really giving them choices anymore. Like in the basement, they had a choice of like which big bad was going to come get them, right? But there was never a choice to actually engage with that big bad. Like the cellar opens because the quote unquote like nerd girl chose dare instead of truth. But like, is that a transgression because she did like one thing different when we already know that she's not a virgin and therefore is already more of a multidimensional person than like the stereotypes or the archetypes that they're looking for, right? So the whole film is based on these rituals that were meant to, I guess, like punish people for being people, but people are more complex now, or like have gotten more complex. So now they have to like set it up so that it's rigged the whole time, but are still like claiming that it's not. So I agree. I don't understand the rules.
Well, so now that you said that, I'm thinking maybe the rules are set because the viewer, like we were talking about as the viewers, they're set that way so that basically they're setting up actors to fit the role, and they don't really care if it matches as long as it makes the people that are supposed to be entertained believe it. And so if they believe that these things are actually happening to them by their own free will, then it counts. Yeah. Interesting.
You know, like, as an audience, like these are the stories we always liked, and so they have to be the stories that we will always like, and that's why we're continuing to make the same horror movie over and over, and any other movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Dang, I missed that. I'm sad that Bruce Campbell wasn't in this.
That would have been cool. At the same time, I do love me Sigourney Weaver. She's my favorite actress, so I will always take a surprise Sigourney.
I'll take it.
Oh,
It's a
I
good.
didn't
It's a
actually
good.
give it my rating, but I would give it 4.25 cabins or stars out of 5.
I guess we're rating now.
Yeah, let's do our ratings.
I should have gone the
So
full
you-
route and done 420.
Oh, there you go.
No, 4.25. Final rating.
4.25 cabins in the wood.
Yeah, the plural.
I am a big fan of this film. I give it 5 cabins out of 5 woods. And I saw this movie. I won tickets to see this in advance. So I saw it a month before it came out. And I had to sort of sit on this movie quietly for a month. I mean, actually, I saw it with the director there doing a Q&A. So Drew Goddard was like, "Don't sit quietly. Tell everybody. Tell the world. It's great." And I sure did. I absolutely loved it. Being a fan of horror movies, seeing how this is both a like embracing love letter to the genre while also being like the sharpest condemnation and criticism of it as well is pretty fantastic. I think the characters, I liked the archetype characters. I liked who they were before they became the archetype characters. I love everybody in the control room, especially Bradley Whitford and Richard Jenkins. They're both just the foulest, sleaziest, yet kind of lovable characters that I wanted to spend more time with them in a weird way. I loved Sigourney Weaver. I'm a big fan of Amy Acker as well. Angel is one of my favorite TV shows, and she played Lynn, the chemist, who's kind of coming in from time to time. But I also am a big fan of, like, when I first saw the movie, I was so let down when it ended up being zombies. I was like, oh, so it's going to be a zombie movie. And the trick worked on me. I was just like, okay, well, let's enjoy this. So when we get to the conclusion where you see everything get released, including the angry molesting tree, which is one of the favorite things that is on that whiteboard and a brilliant reference to the probably grossest part of the original Evil Dead and the hardest part to watch. I liked that was there. I'm a big unicorn guy, so I loved seeing the unicorn, and that's, I think, one of the strongest images of this brilliant horse just goring a guy. There's so much satisfaction for me watching this all throughout. Love the humor, everything. It just works for me.
I couldn't quite understand why they had all those rooms moving, though, right? Like, if you're building this prison for all of these creatures, wouldn't you want, like, a static concrete prison rather than rooms that move around and turn and...
In glass, no less.
I guess that's kind of like a reference to Cube, almost, or something like that, right?
So
I would
they had
imagine.
to move because depending on what they picked, it would have to move them because the whole cage goes to the surface.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it was just
I mean,
neat
it didn't
seeing
see through the glass. How are we going to have that one scene? So
all the different references in that were like just fantastic. The guy that's not Pinhead, but just he's Pinhead, and the like not strangers, but they're the strangers. All that stuff. Was really tight. Ballerina girl was pretty
I think that ballerina was like really well designed. Like that would have been creepy, you know. Just it's nice. You just get a little taste of what's going on here, and that's pretty nice.
It was a real little girl with a mask. They like did some digital enhancement, but
really?
in the book, there's some like behind the scenes stuff. Yeah, they're cleverly disguised eye slits for her to see out of.
So, I know we're kind of giving our little rating, but did any of you have like a monster that you were like, oh man, that would be really cool if they would have picked that like off the board that you would have chose?
I would have said a unicorn because I've never seen a unicorn horror movie. I know one just came out this year, so I'm excited to actually watch that.
Yeah, you should watch that for sure.
Yeah. The Merman captivated me when they kept referencing it, and I was so excited when we actually saw it. But written on the board is just the word Kevin, and that I found fascinating.
Yes.
Kevin would be a real treat, I tell you. Kevin
There's
I don't know if
McAllister.
it's like,
about Kevin.
yeah, I was just gonna say, I want to know if it's a reference to Home Alone.
It's just you go in the cabin and like bowling balls start falling on your head. It's like, what's happening to us?
Is it
Is
Better
there a
Watch
series
Out?
about
That's the
Yeah.
Home Alone Christmas horror film.
Yeah, if you haven't seen Better Watch Out, that is quite.
Yeah, you get the
Quite
evil
the
Kevin
movie.
in that.
Is that who's Santa in that?
There's no Santa in that
Yes.
one. Better
What am I
Watch Out.
thinking of?
Santa's Sleigh with Bill Goldberg.
No, David Harbour.
Oh, Violent
Night.
Okay, because there was a little bit of Home Alone in that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a pretty good movie. So what did you two think of it? How many cabins do you give this?
I say 4 cabins. Just the end really hurt me inside, and that took away a whole cabin.
Worth one whole cabin.
That hand,
That's
too
fair,
much.
Yeah, I feel like 4 is good. I feel like when I first saw it, when it came out, I was very into it. Probably, blown away just because it felt really new. It felt like very tongue in cheek. It felt very like of the time, right? Where people were like just kind of exasperated with what was available, right? It's one of the things I dislike about the horror genre, right? Is that it's very formulaic. I don't feel like they do new things enough where I could be like, well, that's the same as this film and that film and that film. Why is everyone watching all of these films? It's the same movie. So it felt like very new and like cutting edge. And I love when people just like kind of take the piss of stuff like this, where they're like, LOL, everyone makes fun of the fact that they don't stick together or that they run directly into this, the cabin in the woods, where they're going to a place that is obviously going to be haunted or murdery, and they're going there anyway. And the gas station guy is always like some weird redneck that's either going to save you if you listen to him, or he's definitely in on it and going to murder you, right? So it took like all of those pieces where I feel like people were kind of just like burnt out on, and like turned them just enough for it to be like, oh, I like the way that this was used. So I really liked it when it first came out. And then watching it again now to be like a little bit more analytic about it, I just couldn't like get over the fact that, I don't know if it's hell, whatever, these people were like basically Office Space, right? Like the fact that there's an office building, it just tickled me in a good way. I love the fact that they sort of modernized their way out of a job essentially, because they kept just like playing with the mechanics of everything. They were getting too involved. They thought they had everything figured out, and it turns out they didn't. And the fact that like they modernized these trials to the point where like someone could sneak in a back door and get down their elevator and unleash all their monsters is like very funny to me. Like, I don't know. I really like that aspect of it, but I do feel like it does not stick the landing. That hand is wild. I don't know. I don't think we should have seen what the old gods were. I don't think we should have seen it. But maybe that's the point. Maybe that was the point. I don't know.
I have a friend that I hope to get on one of these podcasts one day, named Mark, who said that his only complaint with the film was, rather than see the hand come up at the end when the thing starts, the cabin starts rupturing and stuff, the camera should have like tilted down and shown a theater audience, just the tops of heads in an audience and people just getting up. And I was like, that's a little on the nose, but at the same time, I actually kind of like that ending. I like the whole notion of being up in arms and the visual like tell of that. But I also totally understand where you guys are coming from on that.
Well, when you were saying about modernizing themselves out of a job, did you look at like the each like stone tablet of the different characters and their
Yeah.
portrayals, and the fool's got like a martini glass, like so it's not even like
He's a
it's
jester,
like
right?
oh,
Oh, we lost Sasma.
Bye,
oh no.
Oh, there he is. He's back.
Back.
That's also something that's kind of interesting with the film is at the point when it came out, it was outrageously relevant because these tropes were still being aggressively utilized. Much like Whedon said, it was degenerative. Like at that point, you'd gotten the remakes of like Friday the 13th and The Nightmare on Elm Street and Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween, as well as like new horror movies, but nothing was providing anything new. And now I think this film's criticism kind of did the trick in a weird way. Outside of Evil Dead, the remake, which came out a year after this, you don't have the movies that follow these archetypes really anymore, at least not as beholden to it as the genre had been beforehand. You've had more unique and what they call elevated horror, which is a term I absolutely hate, but has taken popularity. And I think what they're really saying is that these are films that aren't utilizing archetypal characters, but doing a character-first approach to their horror, and then providing the scares or thrills or whatever it is afterwards. And so you're not looking at them as archetypes as much.
Well, it's
So
funny you
in
say
that
that 'cause-
sense, go ahead.
well, yeah, it's funny that you say that because in the last like year or two, I watched a bunch of new horror movies that were made by like smaller studios and like and then produced by like Lionsgate or whatever, or like published, I mean, or whatever you call it in film. But the ones that follow the tropes are like Sony and whatever. It's the ones that have all the money in the world that are too afraid to do anything. Then you get like A24 or like Blumhouse or whatever, and they're like sometimes they're like branching out to do a little bit more unique things because it's not the end of the world if they don't make $1 bazillion on their $1 million budget, because they're gonna make at least so much in the theater. So I've seen a lot of really good movies from smaller studios this year.
It's true. A lot of the really good horror movies have come out of the smaller ones, but like, and that's not to discredit things like Sinners or anything like that, or even to some extent Final Destination, which just came out. But the movies that are more intriguing are the ones that are coming from the very small houses. And I think that's kind of always been the case in a lot of ways, even though there was a lot of popularity with Freddy and Jason and Scream and all that kind of stuff. There was some more interesting horror movies that were coming out around those times too from the smaller houses. That's where you got your Blair Witch Project and Stir of Echoes and things like that.
Less sequels coming out now, thankfully.
Yeah. I agree, and I'm glad this didn't get a sequel, though I would be interested to see. Apparently they had like a notion of an idea. At least that's what Drew Goddard teased when I saw him live. But I'm glad there isn't one to this.
Wait, how didn't the world end at the end of this one?
Yeah, it did. I don't know what. I guess you could have gone back and done a different time period or done the 1998 story or something.
Oh yeah,
isn't the sequel to this Knock at the Cabin? Whatever it's called.
Knock at the Cabin. Yeah. I will say, anytime I see the Harbinger character in another movie, after watching this one, I always say, "Hi, Mordecai." Like he shows up in Friday the 13th and The Hills Have Eyes and Texas Chainsaw Massacre and any number of these old movies. But whenever I see the Harbinger character, I always get a little thrill after seeing this movie because I never put together that he's in a lot of these movies from the 80s and stuff. Did we have any final thoughts going into this? Right on. So why we horrored this one was to really dig into why we horror. Next time we're going to talk about a different film, and we will see why that movie kind of took a different approach to the horror genre. Now I'm going to pull out my special goblet here for those seeing and for those listening. I'm picking up a goblet now. In this goblet, I have a new movie. There are 7 of the more recent movies of the past 5 years that have gotten a lot of talking points on either Letterboxd, IMDb. So I am going to, at random, pull for episode 2. We are going to be talking about the movie I Saw the TV Glow, which is interesting. I've never seen that movie.
I have seen that, Matt. A film I've seen that you haven't.
Look at that. That is kind of wild. I've heard good things. I'm excited to watch it, which apparently I'm going to be doing for episode 2. And I hope you all are able to come back at some point and do another one if you enjoyed this. But yeah, thanks for watching. You can watch us on YouTube, or thanks for listening to the Standard Podcast. Anybody have any final words? All right.
No.
Peace, everybody.
Thanks for having me, and I'd love to be back.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Fabulous. Awkward ending is awkward. Bye.
Bye.